interest group. As we've shared earlier, the Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group is one of several created by the Institute to facilitate substantive discussions by alumni, faculty, and eminent practitioners in specific sectoral areas such as healthcare, technology, analytics, women alumni, entrepreneurship, etc. As you may have seen, in the first two editions, public policy SIG webinars, the theme that we have been running is the burning issue of the time, that is our response to the new normal, how COVID-19 affects various facets of the economy and our life, and how should we respond to it. Today's topic is transforming agriculture during COVID-19. Now, admittedly, this is a vast topic in itself, and doing justice to all its related areas will be a challenge in a one-hour session. However, to address the issues involved, we have with us today two eminent personalities to take a stab at these issues, talk about what affects it, what we can do, what should our response be, and how should we go ahead from this, what lessons should we learn. We have with us Dr. Yoginder K. Alagh. Dr. Alagh, as you know, is an eminent economist and author, a former Union Minister of Science and Technology. He has also been the former chairman of IRMA and the chancellor of Central University of Gujarat. Professor Sebastian Morris is a professor of economics and public systems at IIMA. And I will hand over the platform to Professor Morris and Dr. Alagh now. There'll be a conversation between them, and after the conversation, the audience can ask questions. I request the audience to put up their questions in the Q&A section. And over to you, Dr. Alagh and Professor Morris.
Yeah, it's actually a pleasure to be here, and particularly in the company of Dr. Anand. And so he has been, much more than a mentor. I mean, I wish I had been taught formally by Dr. Alagh, but, I've learned so much from his writings and discussions with him. What has impressed me most is his policy orientation in practically everything that he has written, and with very deep insights. So what I would suggest is that we go ahead with the first presentation by Dr. Alagh, in which he takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and then we can have the question and answers. And I will also raise some questions and directly to Dr. Alagh. So I won't make a formal presentation. What I'll do is I'll just raise some issues and respond to what Dr. Alagh says, and perhaps kind of raise further questions based on what he says. Okay. And I'll of course await questions from the audience. So I'm hopeful that this would be a very interactive session. Okay. So over to you, Dr. Alagh. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sebastian. As you have said in the preparatory meetings for this meeting, we wanted to emphasize some of the fundamentals of agriculture, but also to look at it in the period of the COVID, because in a way, I think it's very sensible to think that during the COVID period, agriculture is the one sector which can sustain itself, and also it might well be a period in which we can also strengthen the agricultural sector itself. Now, Professor Morris has listed a set of questions, which, as he said, he might come to later on. I will concentrate on some of the preparatory meetings that we have had. To begin with, I think it's important to realize that the agricultural sector is a sector which gives us strength to face these problems. Please remember that even as the migrants go back home, they are able to do so. We are able to feed people We are able to feed those who are in trouble because we have sufficient because the sector itself gives us the strength to be able to face these problems. We can also use this time to strengthen the sector. There are fundamental problems in the sector. I will come to the ones which are COVID related a little later, but consider the real problems of, for example, irrigation. Now, you look at Gujarat, we have had a fairly good rate of growth in the agricultural sector for the first time only in this century. And that was because of Sardar Sarovar. In the year 2002, two things happened in Gujarat. Modi became the chief minister, and also Sardar Sarovar water started coming in. Now, we didn't really implement the irrigation projects the way they are supposed to be. In the beginning, there was plenty of water, so there were no problems. Actually, the trouble, in fact, there was some trouble because Gujarat agriculture is highly diversified. It is not like the Punjab, Haryana, Western UP model. It's not just based on what are called the single crop, single region models. Grains always be a small part of agriculture. In Gujarat, cotton, oil seeds, and animal husbandry have been its big strengths. But because we had an irrigation project which was not implemented the way it was, because what was designed was a system called SCADA, which was a computerized system where the entire canal would be computerized up to the level of the field. Now, we tried to implement SCADA, but somehow or the other, the government could not give the tenders and they kept on retendering it. In fact, they have retendered it again now for the fourth time during the last 20 years. So there was flood irrigation. That meant that Gujarat actually went over to rice and wheat. Now, some people said that, this is because of, actually that there is not much of rice and wheat, but satellite pictures showed that this is what was happening. Now the water is being used up. And now there are real problems. In fact, I had said that if you don't really do the irrigation properly, you will later on you will face tremendous problems, and you might face the police. And in fact, we have had to use the police to control canal water distribution because we have not been able to achieve an irrigation efficiency of around 55%, and the actual irrigation efficiency right now is around 38%. Now, in a commercial agriculture, which is the agriculture outside the wheat rice belt of northwestern India, what you need is markets. And markets are not just APMCs. We have actually computer pictures or scan shows. We have one of the largest spread of markets, agricultural markets in the world. But what is a market? It can be anywhere where the peasant lady brings the crop and she sells. Not in the APMC. This is a mistake. In fact, it is trade and transport, which is the central piece of the dynamism of our agriculture outside Punjab and Haryana. And in the COVID period, it is that transport link which gets disturbed because for very valid health reasons, you can lock down. Lockdown means that trains and trucks, and the farmer uses both. He can travel by train himself, or he can go in a small commercial vehicle or hire space in a truck. That gets highly disturbed. So in fact, what is happening is that while the APMCs and the markets are working, the trade link gets disturbed because transport is the other side of the coin of trade. And without that, you get these things. So now the reason why I'm bringing this out is that one of the things that we can consider is that we should give a clear-cut recommendation that this is the period in which we should improve agricultural supply chains, infrastructure for agriculture like irrigation, input supply patterns, because these things are relatively cheaper in this period, and because people are not otherwise employed, they will be able to use this and also help the trading chain. Unfortunately, most of us tend to think in terms of what to do after agriculture, after COVID. The challenge really is during the COVID period, you reform the agricultural supply chains, you reform the input systems, irrigation, land records, the rest of it, and you also, of course, help the sector on a day-to-day basis in terms of trade and transport links. Now, that doesn't come easy to management specialists and particularly economists, because economists always tend to think in terms of life patterns. And here we are at the distressing point where we are talking of deaths. And it becomes very difficult for us to think this through. The reason why I say this is that, in fact, we can, the priority of fighting the pandemic will be the highest priority that we have, because saving lives is far more important than anything else. If a life is saved, even if the person is hungry, we may be able to feed her or him a year down the time. But if he's not there, then we've lost him forever. So these are not easy problems for economists. And you see very good suggestions made. I mean, recently you had both Montek and Kaushik talking about agriculture, about the economy after COVID. But I think the challenge is during the COVID period, what is it that you should do?
Yeah.
So we should give clear signals to the government that this is a time to invest in water, in land development, in markets, build up infrastructure where the farmer goes. And invariably, she goes to what we call census towns, because these are actually towns, but because of the politics of Panchayati Raj, we still call them villages. Now, this is where we want to build up infrastructure. First stage processing, helping the farmer, supply chains, improving land records. All of it, I think, is something to which we should give emphasis. And if we do this, we sustain agriculture, we also improve its functioning. I think we need to give a policy message that when you introduce a lockdown or a shutdown, which you will have to, administration at the highest level should provide that agriculture can function the way it is going along. And that requires talent of a very high kind. And if we can use the very good talent that we have in this webinar to make suggestions there, I would feel very happy. I think at this stage, I'll stop with this. And if there are questions and comments, I'll be very happy to come back again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think before the comments from those who are listening come in, let me just, emphasize what you've said. I mean, you see, one of the great things any government can do in a situation like this is to combine reforms with demand measures. Okay, we saw that the the great liberalization really worked because the structural adjustment went along with the stabilization. And actually, the demand was never allowed to falter, and therefore it succeeded. So here, Dr. Alagh is making the point that look, isn't this the right time to kind of do further work on all the infrastructure projects and all the irrigation projects and complete them? Okay, so all the agricultural infrastructure, irrigation particularly, but also the storage, market towns, processing facilities. These are all things on which effort can go in. Okay, there's also the time in which land records and title records can actually come. In a different context, I have argued that in fact there's a golden opportunity for the government of India to make money by clearing up, by kind of setting up a title clearing house into which the farmers and everybody else can submit their deeds and records, and government can use actually GPS to converge and create a massive titling scheme. And this can be enabled by using GPS. And it's more like a jigsaw puzzle. The moment you start, it looks very difficult, but once a few pieces are there, the rest of it falls in place. So this can do wonderfully well in terms of creating property rights, clarity of property rights. So there are a whole lot of structural measures which Dr. Alagh has talked about, which will also be demand enhancing because they immediately set in motion additional demand based on a vigorous completion of all the irrigation projects and perhaps even new ones being taken up and so on. So I see great value in that, and let's hope that government actually picks up and considers these. Now, I would like to raise a question in this regard. See, what has actually happened, though, is that there has been more of knee-jerk reaction to the COVID rather than any thought-out strategy. Now, I'm not saying that you can have a really well thought-out strategy to a crisis which is unfolding and which is dynamically shifting. However, there are many things which I would think went wrong. One is we have had a kind of territorial and a lockdown where the value or the kind of assessment of that lockdown was based on its totality. Okay, the more total the lockdown, the better we are doing. That was enormously dysfunctional because when the lockdowns were lifted, the very totality during the lockdown meant people crowded around, and that may have actually enhanced or the spread or which may have done all that. But more than that, I would think that the supply chain should not have been affected as they were, not just in agriculture, but even in manufacturing. Of course, in agriculture, it has been possibly less affected as compared to manufacturing. Now, there I see a fracturing of the markets. Okay, that means because of these logistic problems which you outlined, the prices that farmers may get may be actually very low. On the other hand, urban people may have to pair up to higher prices, shortages, and so on and so forth, even as perhaps a lot of agricultural produce, particularly the perishables, get wasted. So, Dr. Alagh, what do you think government can do now that this has happened? How does it actually organizationally respond? What could be the response? I mean, it's easy to say, okay, this should not happen, but what does the government actually do?
Well, you have farmer producer organizations, unfortunately, not spread all across the country. And those are things that you can resurrect again. The interesting thing is that these experiments have succeeded more when the farmer producer organization is linked up with some corporates also. I mean, the corporate sector has always had a sort of bad name for Indian agriculture because they tended to exploit it. And yet, during the last few years, you have seen a number of companies which have gone into those agricultural sectors where the income elasticity of demand is high, animal husbandry products, first stage processed investments. But that also means that the farmer has to be organized in a way such that he can interact. Otherwise, you'll have the sort of Pepsi Cola problem coming up again and again, and these become politically very sensitive issues. So if we do this in a kind of nuanced manner, if we are able to spread, the Rallis model, which or the I Shakti pulses, I think those are the kinds of things which we can try and strengthen at this time. NABARD does give funds. They have actually created a special window, and it's doing well in, I mean, for example, their funding is doing reasonably well in a state like Gujarat, but unfortunately, it doesn't have a pan-Indian effect as yet. And I think that is something which is really, I hope in this webinar, some of the management people, incidentally, I put on my Morton jacket today just to be in sync with all the managers here.
Yeah, Dr. Alagh, you didn't mention the NDDB and that kind of effort. You headed the IRMA, okay, and you have been involved there. So, one of the great organizations in India which has been responsible for so many people coming out of the poverty line is perhaps the NDDB and its Operation Flood, and and maybe in an earlier period, Operation Golden Flow, but particularly the milk side. Now, there, of course, the key thing was the organizational effort and the fact that they could strategize and see value in the chain. So now, if we take, say, fruits and vegetables, which have become really ubiquitous and where farmers actually lose money and face great risks, why shouldn't the government allow or maybe cajole NDDB or like organizations to go and do this job and create a kind of a farmer-owned but highly technically competent and very large organization, which can actually take, let's say, small produce from all kinds of farmers, including those who have half an acre, maybe just even 100 square yards of property, and bring it to the table, in a certain way. I mean, if you can do it with milk, it's somewhat more difficult with vegetables, I can understand. But surely there is an option out there. Okay, so what can the government do to create these kind of organizations, which can then become mother organizations for smaller FPOs and of the kind that you're talking about, which then need not be need not go the Pepsi way, with a one-sided power being exercised.
Well, Kurian himself felt that the cooperative model will not succeed. I think if the government can really see to it that Sarkari cooperatives with a lot of
Yeah, I think we are missing Dr. Anand. Just yeah, while I think, okay, Dr. Alagh has come back. You need to voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, we missed the last minute, so kindly go ahead.
Yeah, but I think if we can help it's a very tall order because you are asking a political system not to help some political parties. And remember, the politics of cooperatives of the old style is as bad as the politics of education because, a large scale voting there. But if we can develop these systems, which is what farmer producer organizations or NDDB is really all about, then I think that will be both helpful in the COVID period and it will be helpful more generally because remember the co-ops have been helping even, and I think we should also, the fact that you've had migrant labor going back, we should use those skills to in fact do some of the things that we are talking about.
Yeah.
So this has happened in many countries of the world. In Indonesia, my friend Ivan Aziz, who's at Cornell, has shown how these kinds of periods help in bringing back skills into backward regions and the rural sectors. So these are things uh, to do in a nuanced manner, remembering that the first priority will always be to save lives.
Slightly shifting gear. Okay. Government has announced quite a few measures actually in terms of the agricultural sector. One is, of course, freeing agriculture from the APMCs, okay, allowing farmers a direct access to urban areas and so on. So, I would like you to kind of go through what these government measures are and what you think these would amount to. Would they be kind of earth shaking? Would they make a dramatic shift? Would they kind of increase the demand? What more needs to be done? Or are they just the beginning, etc.?
Are you going to be in some of the panelists, Sebastian? Now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we can have questions from the panel as well. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I think it's high time that you brought them in.
Sure. Let's
you
bring
can
them
come back again.
So, anybody from the panel with questions, and Anurag and others who are on the summarizing it, can be have questions from the from outside this group, from the alumni and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Alagh, there was a good question on the national agricultural market, and that it's been conceived as an ambitious project to connect buyers and sellers. And is it likely, does it have enough elements in it? Does it structurally look like it is sound enough to succeed? And if there are certain elements within it which don't seem like they belong there and they should be done away with, are there some elements that should be removed from it to make sure that it succeeds in a much more holistic manner?
Sorry, what project was this?
So this is a national agricultural market.
Yeah,
So,
that's, it's a very interesting project. But really, the place where it is working, for example, let's take the success story, is chilies in Andhra. And in many other cases, what happens is that the registration requirements are such that a lot of the peasants themselves get knocked off. And basically, the, the ENAM is itself used by the old Arthia again in a new form. I've seen this happen even in the well-known direct benefit payment project in Madhya Pradesh. But the success stories are, as I said, one that I know of really, which has been written off also. Uh, it's it's this chilies in Andhra, and I think they went out of the way to see to it that the connection is between the farmer, who in many cases even there is a lady, the one who comes to deliver the crops, and also give support in interacting with the ENAM market. That needs training, that needs that kind of thing. Otherwise, you get back again to the guy who knows what to do and he takes it from them and they really don't get these benefits. So I think it's a very good idea. In some parts, it's succeeding. I was once told uh, Yoginder in Washington uh, nothing succeeds in India. So I told this gentleman that is the time when we knew we had become food self-reliant. They didn't. I said, yes, but nothing ever fails in India also. So the real issue is the success stories. We have to replicate the condition. And if we help the farmer, I think the e-market will go much further. And it's a very good idea. And, some of them, for example, I got a telegram recently and a message that these people now with the coffee exchange in London. I mean, imagine in the back of the boondocks, and they are now, you know, trading in futures and doing the right thing. And during the COVID period, incidentally. So a lot can happen, and more of it has to happen. That's the point.
Well, I would think that there could be a bit of a confusion here. I can remember quite a number of government initiatives, which were kind of putting out these ideas that portals would work. For instance, there was e-Sagu, and there were several other things essentially put together by or designed by the Media Lab Asia and so on. Now, at that time, I found a kind of inability to distinguish between active prices on which a trade can happen and dead prices. I mean, I can always have a portal which presents what the prices are in Madhya Pradesh here and there. But unless it's a COMEX terminal actually which is scaled down and made available on which I can seal a deal, it's not going to work out. So, of course, the ENAM is trying to do that. And therefore, I would think it's good. But, simultaneously, if the government goes knocking off commodity exchanges, okay, then you're not going to have futures which are long enough developing so that farmers can seal the deal before they sow. And I think that's important. So there's a general assumption that, look, COMEXs are dirty, they lead to speculation and so on. They would, they could, but they're not necessary. If they can be tamed through government operations in the COMEXs by actual trading, if FCI and others can also deal in COMEXs, including some of the lower end commodities, then you can extend the terminals, and create more commodity ideas within the COMEXs and extend them at a smaller unit lot to the farmers. And that could perhaps, benefit. So just throwing I don't think would, create that kind of great positive effect. Because if it can develop to a point where the farmer can take a decision of his sowing based on, actually future prices, which are 6 months ahead or 4 months ahead, depending on the cropping, then enormous gain would have been made. So that's the second.
Sebastian, this is what you're saying is very important, and this is because the real question is to give the farmer appropriate price signals.
That's right.
And somehow the other government always tends to think of, we still have this mindset that futures are satbazi and exploiters and all that. Yes, it is true. In some commodities, in some markets, you are talking about thin markets. Yeah. Well, if you have thin markets, that's an area for government intervention to see to it that the market doesn't. Yeah. The idea is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. And most certainly these days, when communication becomes more difficult, using the internet, I don't know, you must be knowing it, but the American Agricultural Service, an American farmer knows what are the sow decisions that the Andhra farmer is making before he makes his own decisions. Now, that's the kind of service.
Yeah, sure.
So, that's the kind of information which we should be giving. And instead, we treat futures in a completely barbaric manner rather than using them. I'm sorry to use that kind of language, rather than as a policy tool. And these are the kinds of times when movement is more difficult and information-based solutions using modern technology are there, that we should strengthen these things.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Can we think of replacing PDS with DBT? And this has come, I think, from some of the members who have been listening. Yeah.
Yeah, what some of the farmers are, I hate to monopolize this.
Yeah, so I mean, the question was, can we replace PDS with DBT? Of course, I have been arguing you should do that, but anyway, Dr. Alagh, your views on that.
Well, PDS should really be for the very needy. Definitely, it should be oriented towards them. And for a somewhat larger population, when there are problems, uh, bad crops, bad years, uh, and the more you simplify the system, the better it is. I think the real issue there is, when will we be able to give the farmer, and please remember that even what we call landless laborers, they have some land. So, I mean, if you have less than a quarter of an acre of land, you're still called a landless laborer. To those kinds of people, whether we can link them up with these kinds of systems. And otherwise, what happens is that, as most studies show, between 40 to 60% of the farmers get left out. Now, they're still a small part of the total land, because a large number of them have very small pieces of land. But then they are the ones who need this help the most. So the better you are able to organize these information systems, the easier it is to move out of these systems which have, we know, large leakages and are not really as efficient as they should be. The really question is, when can we effectively bring in alternatives which work better?
Sure. See, my point there is, and I've been arguing this for many, many years now, that there's a lot of scope for direct benefit transfers, what the government has called, what we have called, direct endowment subsidies. Now, on the PDS side, see, there has been also some confusion, because PDS, along with PDS goes the buffer stocking and so on. But I think there's a need to separate buffer stocking from PDS. Okay? So the value of buffer stocking in India, nobody can deny. Okay, but FCI does it in a very inefficient way, because FCI is thoroughly intervened, micromanaged by the government. Government tells the FCI what to store, where to buy, how to store, will not allow them, for instance, grain storage in large bins and so on. They have to store in certain ways which are enormously wasteful. Now we throw the waste that FCI indulges in onto subsidization. But suppose if FCI is given the autonomy, let's say that the NDDB enjoys, they are most capable of doing the right kind of MIO. And much of that storage can actually shift onto the private sector through appropriate deals and so on. Okay? So market making in a way that helps both the farmer as well as the consumer can actually happen in India. And it would, and given India's high variability across time, this would be of great value. And poor people can be given the endowments, the scripts by which they can draw from the market. And I don't see why the two should be, humped together, because markets are well developed. Why shouldn't the poor go and, let's say, use a token which the government gives and encash grain or whatever from a supermarket or whatever? Why shouldn't that happen? So I would think that there is enormous scope to do that. But of course, many have argued against that as well, because they would say that the government can't even implement a direct subsidy scheme. I would say if the government can't implement a direct subsidy scheme, then clearly the government is not implementing a PDS scheme either. Okay? And the people who are going to miss out on the PDS are precisely the poor. So of course, some capability is from the government. Anyway, let's shift gear and add this question for Dr. Alagh. And this is
our experience with, what you're saying is very important. Both me as well as the former chairman of NABARD, we were very keen when there was some people who got into building up private storages. In fact, there was a company which was started by 5 Aratiyas from Rajasthan called Star Agri, and we helped them. And the Singapore fellow invested a lot of money and they own water of company. But you know, the whole concept of using the private sector, because the heart of the game in the storage is that the parchi, which you give to the farmer for storage, should be used as collateral.
Yeah.
Now, some or the other doing that in our financial system with a private sector storage becomes very difficult. And nobody has really done the kind of reform. You know, this is the kind of thing which, okay, I mean, one has written about it. That's not the issue. The question is somebody has to cover the last mile. And I think that just would be a step in the right direction. I see no reason why more than half the storage capacity in the country can't be in the private sector. I'm sorry I mentioned one company's name, but there are many others who are waiting in the wings. And I think these things need to be looked at somewhat carefully.
Yeah, so there is a very interesting question which has come up. What can APMCs do in this current crisis? Dr. Alagh, did you get my question? What can the agricultural APMCs do in the current crisis? It has come from...
No, I think APMCs.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I have very standard views. I think APMCs in any case don't cover as much of the agricultural produce as we think they do. If you really look at satellite-based information, a lot of the what we call markets are outside the APMCs, and the APMCs are dominated by a few Aratiyas. Now, there have been attempts to reform that system. As I told you, the only place where I really saw the reform working was in Chili's in Andhra. I think the real question is the other one, that wherever the farmer goes, can we build up facilities for her? You know, I once went to Dahod, where my friend Jagawat was running an NGO, and these ladies were producing vegetables with, you know, in a dry area, but with the strategy was small tank irrigation. And, you know, what they were producing was taken by traders from as far away as Surat. And then some of them started going to the market. And then the next time when I was coming back, in Dahod town, there was a crowd at one place. Kya hua? Well, she was hit by an SUV. So this is what it is, Sebastian. Can we really create infrastructure to support the peasant wherever she goes? We should be doing that right now, particularly because market and trade reform in a lockdown period, if we give agriculture priority, it's sort of double benefit. It's divine from the hell of an economist.
There's a
thing about it.
Yeah.
And the more we do, the better it is.
I mean, just to build on what was said about the FCI and so on, there's a question on FCI, why can't it be privatized? I mean, I'd ask the same question. I would first ask, why the hell can't the government give autonomy to the FCI? And if you give autonomy, they're very good managers, they should be able to manage. So how do you give autonomy? You give them a framework that, look, this is your basic purpose, that you have to stabilize prices and ensure that both farmers and consumers gain. And here is, let's say, $50 billion to manage the food stocks and whatever. So you buy where you want to buy and so on, and you do it. I don't interfere internally in your decision. That would be ideal. But if that doesn't happen, and FCI, actually, the challenge is, give me a desk with 5 guys, okay, maybe 10 guys, I'm exaggerating. Give me $50 billion, and one can actually do the what one would call market intervention operations in India. Everything else can be done by the private sector on contract, including where to store, where to buy, how to store, and all of that. Okay, so it's possible, but government wants to interfere. Government wants to tell, okay, you buy this rotten grain here, or you store it here, and so on. So that kind of brings such a bad name for storage. And storage, huge amounts of storage is done by China, by the US, in a more distributed way, and so on. And without storage, we are caught with our pants down. When we buy globally, we pay much higher prices than when others buy, because they do it smartly. Now, I would like to raise another question, which has been built into some of the questions which others have raised, which is about MSP and the farmer and market prices. Now, last several years we have seen, I think at least a couple of years, we have seen the market prices dip much lower than the MSPs. Now, this makes the MSPs a contradiction in terms, because if they are truly MSPs, the price could not have fallen. So when the government declares a certain MSP, I would think it's absolutely serious that it will not allow the price to fall below. In other words, it will stand ready to buy. So what is happening? I mean, why call these MSPs if the prices are going to fall below? And what needs to be done? Okay. Dr. Alagh, I mean, your views on this.
Well, we know what needs to be done. We know that the MSP doesn't work apart from some regions and some crops. And really everything else that we have been talking about, strengthening markets and so on, is important. But the farmer everywhere wants MSPs because, well, I mean, if I got, if I write for a few newspapers and somebody gives me a fixed income, I'm much happier. So I don't blame them. And yet MSPs, we know don't work. Again, there are examples where people have shown that it doesn't work. I mean, there is this Sahyadri farmer producer organization. And Sahyadri is now exporting both to the United States and England. And he came to me, he sent me word that he has followed my model. He came and explained it to me. And I introduced him to the Prime Minister's office and to the Planning Commission. And they all said, wah, wah, wah. But these alternative models linking up the corporate sector with farmer producer organizations, it is happening, but most certainly not at the pace at which we want and in the regions in which we want. In Gujarat, NABARD called me on their annual day, and it's doing reasonably well. But not if you look at the NABARD data for the country as a whole, they have a special window for funding such experiments, and that money is not taken. So obviously, well, we don't have Koreans, and we are not doing enough to build up that kind of infrastructure everywhere.
Yeah.
And the political pressure is always to make the simplest announcement when you know it doesn't work. I mean, announcement of MSPs in most of India outside the northwestern region is really a kind of joke.
Yeah,
and
it's a joke.
Even the farmers want MSP announced karto, and what they have in mind is somebody will buy. Well, all of it is a mirage. And I think the kind of leadership which says that it is a mirage and you do it in a different way is something that will come in the future. It will, I'm sure. The next generation is smarter than mine. That's the Alagh law of progress. So I think they'll find out better ways of doing it.
What you're saying, Dr. Alagh, is that MSPs have deteriorated so much that they've merely become something to hoodwink everybody. You announce MSPs which are unrealistically high. No buying is done at that. So they are meaningless. So the market price anyway dissolves down below. And yet, if the farmer thinks that something positive has been done for him by mere announcement, and if he's that foolish, or if he's, kind of, then why not indulge in that?
Yeah.
So, I said it, it's not you saying it, but you said it in a more sophisticated way. Now, let me shift gear and talk about food processing. We have a ministry for food processing, but so little of India's food is of agricultural products is actually processed. And so the question I have is, we are possibly the only country in the world which has a ministry specifically devoted for food processing. And yet the results are so pathetic. So what could be the case? I mean, I would think perhaps taxes. Taxes for processed foods are very high. But is there anything else other than the usual infrastructural failure which is, resulting in?
They give subsidies also, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the
You worked on these issues.
No, the taxes are, see, my view is that the taxes have been too high. See, GST, for instance, if you put a packet of tomatoes, I mean, a kilo or so of tomatoes into a Tetra Pak, and you want to sell it, you straight away are hit with a huge tax burden. Okay, because that's rich man, etc., etc. In that process, the whole, arbitrage, I mean, the option to really bridge between the seasons goes away. And if that goes away, then the farmer gets very little value. So if you have a highly varying wholesale price, okay, even if the average of that wholesale price is higher, what the farmer gets is going to be a small part of that. However, even if you have a somewhat lower wholesale price, but it's not varying too much, then the farmer is able to get a better deal. So, we have gone wrong because we have allowed huge price volatility, and government may have actively contributed to, for instance, onion price volatility. So price volatility is another thing which hurts. And, systems which can lower those price volatility, basically, what Dr. Alagh said, farmers, producers, cooperatives, direct connection between farmers and buyers, and between agents and buyers, and so on, could help a great deal. But I'm just wondering whether a public aspect is not involved. That means, when you store so much, and when you need to store in order to even across, some kind of subsidy on that needs to go in. And what are the ways in which these can, go into the system?
Sure.
Because the public side is very important, because the private fellow will always store based on profitability, when he can. And there is also the element of supernormal profits out there. But the public storage can always be to act against this kind of opportunistic behavior. Okay. So, so hence the government needs to be there, but how can it efficiently be there? What kind of organizational and managerial competences it needs? Can it really come from the government? Where civil servants are in place for a few hours.
Some of our panelists have global experience. Can we get a bit of that into the discussion? They're working with the World Bank, with other places. That would, I think, at this stage, be very helpful for us.
Yeah, there's a very interesting question here. Sir, in this story on Alibaba's creation, Jack Ma cites that farmers in China would have to send truckloads of apples at the weaker end of the negotiation table, where they were now able to sell apples a basket at a time. Any relevance to e-com aggregation in India? Okay, I would think yes. This is a real challenge for e-com aggregators. Instead of everybody wanting to aggregate food and do delivery business, if some of our youngsters can also create models by which farmers can quickly reach, local, global, and so on, it would be great. But government needs to have true support measures also for this. Yeah.
See, when we make comparisons with China, we forget that China has an investment rate of around 40%.
45%.
So its infrastructure
Yeah.
is superb.
Yeah.
To take things from the farm to the city, the highways are better. And, those kind of things matter a lot. And I wouldn't at all be surprised if the ICOR is much higher in China than in India. I think for a low investment economy, we are doing, I'm surprised at how well we are doing. I mean, investment rates in agriculture had gone down. Now they're going up. And for some reason, even though they are going up, we are not getting good returns. And I don't know why the ICOR in agriculture is going up. Maybe we are getting into diminishing returns. I think this is an area in which we need proper studies. But we've abolished planning. But the Niti Aayog should really get into what are some of the long-term issues on land and water, and why are we doing badly? Why is the Advanced Irrigation Benefit Program not working now when it was working earlier?
My question is, why wouldn't we do badly? Okay. Why shouldn't we do badly when you're incentivizing bad performance? Okay. Take, for instance, water and water pricing. Okay. Electricity pricing is at zero tariff. So it's an open invitation to the farmer to waste electricity. Okay. In fact, the India pulls out more groundwater than possibly the rest of the world put together to produce maybe 15-20% of the world's agricultural output. Now that's ridiculous, because you could have done that with much less. But why should the farmer do anything other than what he's doing? Because the price is zero. So at a zero price, this is what he'll do. Forget about what he pays as overall tariff. So if the asking price, the kind of use price is zero, why wouldn't he do it? Now come to canal irrigation. The prices are so low that, again, the water gets wasted. So there are reform measures, which can go on here, which is to, give direct subsidy. So that if you give direct subsidy and it's an endowment subsidy, and if he consumes anything more than his endowment, he pays the market price. And if you allow tradability, then obviously this can go down. So there is a huge inefficiency in Indian agriculture. In fact, the water efficiency, as I understand, is a pathetic low, compared to either China or the US. China, of course, is much more efficient. The numbers go as 6,000 liters of water per kilo of rice or some such thing in India, versus maybe as low as 600 liters per kilo of rice in China, versus 2,000 liters in the US. So the water efficiency of Indian crops is enormously bad, and therefore, I'm not at all surprised that the ICOR in agriculture is as high as it is in India, despite the human labor effort being so high. So I would not be surprised, because it's an open invitation for waste. I mean, sprinkler, such systems,
But we need more work also, Sebastian.
Yeah, sure, we need more work. I mean, these are just based on insights and gross data. But these are not areas where agricultural economists have worked. They're kind of, they don't see it that way. They have seen irrigation expansion as great. Similarly, I would think that a lot of the state government's irrigation projects are stretched so much in time and with cost overruns. Okay, and if these are actually charged to those projects, then the cost, then those alone can push the the overall ICOR in agriculture. There is another question which I'd like to come to, and that's based on the scale. Many are asking, is there any country which doesn't subsidize agriculture? Okay, and I thought that's an interesting question. So I would think the very land-endowed countries, like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the Keynes group of countries probably give very little or hardly any subsidies. Thailand, which are land endowed and also have developed infrastructure and support measures. But most others would have to, because free trade doesn't really work in agriculture. You can show even with normal assumptions that free trade is suboptimal. That's my view. Dr. Alagh, what do you think? I mean, it's a serious question which has come.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question right.
Yeah, so what is there any country? So why is there so much subsidization in agriculture? If you look at many countries, most countries do intervene or do subsidize agriculture. Why is it so?
Well, I think it's a sort of way of lifeism.
Yeah.
As populations move away from rural to urban areas, in some countries it's as low as 3% left in rural areas.
Yeah.
There is a sort of, partly it's a nostalgic feeling of the farming as a system, rural life as a model of existence.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But we are on the other side. I mean, we are really a country where, well, from any standards, deprivation rates are high. I don't want to get into poverty numbers because I've always been saying that the Alagh poverty line should be dunked. For the last 20 years, and it's still not dunked. It keeps on coming back. The same reason. Nobody is willing to reduce the poverty line. The government is not willing to increase it, so you don't really solve the problem. But uh, but all countries don't have this problem. They don't have the level of destitution that we still have, and even then, they subsidize agriculture. It's a way of life, is all that I'll say. And then, of course, in those countries, losing more jobs wherever it is also something that they don't like.
I would probably emphasize the last one, the losing jobs argument. See, if we take a broad historical kind of sweep over, let's say, the complete economic transformation of a country, then what happens really is that the productivity which can happen in non-agriculture is much higher because you can throw capital very readily at it, technology. So typically in non-agriculture, you can look forward to a productivity change of maybe X%, whereas in agriculture, you can have a much lower labor productivity in a sustained way. And land is a basic limitation in dense economies. So soon enough, the returns or the total income which you can generate out of a unit of labor keeps declining in agriculture relatively, vis-a-vis other activities. So, and this has been felt by all the advanced countries, I mean, when they had to kind of restore the terms of trade in favor of agriculture, particularly if they were population dense. England did that through the Corn Laws and then its abolition and so on. So China today does that. China's agriculture is highly protected and it helps the agricultural sector. So Indian agriculture also needs that support because we have 2% of the world's land with something like 16-17% of the world's population. And for a long, long time, if agricultural incomes have to not widen the income vis-a-vis the rest of agriculture, they'll need some subsidy. Okay. The other thing is that you can't, there's a lot of market failure in agriculture. So I would think that subsidies in agriculture are something which is necessary. And it's not like subsidies in manufacturing or other areas. And the faster we realize that it's inevitable, the better it is. And therefore, that the subsidy should not distort, the price measures should not distort, should be the approach, rather than saying, oh, let's eliminate or let's reduce, and so on. Okay. So they are clearly there. And that to Dr. Alagh, I would like to raise another question, okay, which is that perhaps we are in a time.
Well,
it's kind of reaching time, right? So
it's a very complex question.
Yeah, okay.
Let me only say one thing, that farmers all over the world complain in the same way. I mean, I've spent evenings with farmers in a little bar in Canada somewhere, or in the US, and they talk precisely the way, if I pick up my Maruti and go 40 kilometers in any direction from Ahmedabad, and I say, how are the rains and what is happening? The language is different, but the complaints are the same.
Hmm.
I think these are issues which there is a sort of way of life in it also. I don't think any society wants that the rural part is decimated
Yeah,
completely.
that's clearly true for the advanced.
It's in
Right.
countries like India and China and Egypt, of course. I mean, we've got some of the best farming that the world has known in terms of, uh, under very difficult conditions, producing something. And those kings and those invaders who left the farmer alone, they were all right. The ones who tried to intervene there always suffered.
That's true.
And farmers, it's very interesting how they do their politics. I mean, we had 50,000 farmers who last year came into Bombay in a famous march. And then somebody said, "पर बच्चों की परीक्षा है." So they said, नहीं, ये तो बड़ा जरूरी है. We will. They parked outside Bombay so that the kids could give their exams, and then they came marching in. I mean, there is agriculture. There is a little more to it, Sebastian, than people like you and me and the economics that we learn. It is a way of life, and I think
Sure.
politicians take advantage of that. But there is a fact behind it also.
Yeah, sure. But I know from a policy perspective, what I'm saying is we need to understand the in a deeper sort of way the nature of market failure in agriculture. And one of the market failures is one of the participants is pointing out that if there is a bumper harvest, then farmers suffer. Okay, and I think that's very, very important. Okay, so that there is mitigation of that. Okay, and that can be done only if the kind of markets, storage, shortening of logistic cycles, COMEXs which can give future prices, and all of that develops. And governments therefore have a huge role, and therefore government efficiency is very important. But if the organizational efficiency of the government of India is what it is, then at least it needs that discipline by which it allows autonomous organizations like the NDDB and others to actually function instead of interfering. So the first thing I think it can do is give FCI and the other organizations, irrigation departments and so on, the kind of independence that they need.
I must tell you a story on this, Sebastian.
Yeah.
I produced a model once which did all the nice things that you were saying. And then what happened was that after 10 years, more than 2/5 of the Indians who were not getting enough food got a job and were doing well. And one of the very senior politicians, she asked me to do a presentation. Someone told her I'd written that in a book. So I gave her a presentation. And she said, Dr. Alagh, is it really 22 to 28%? So I told her, I said, ma'am, I'm absolutely clear about the numbers. And then I started laughing. And she said, why are you laughing? I said, it's only a modeler who knows how imprecise numbers are. I'm only talking about directions of change. So I think we need to be very clear that what we talk about in this degree of precision of the medium and the long term is perhaps wrong, but we do give important lessons. But I think the more important thing is what you were saying earlier, that in the short run, we are very clear about what is to be done. And I think economists and management specialists um, should find ways of getting heard. And I hope you will we will produce a kind of write-up of our webinar and send it to the appropriate authorities for action, because I think it will help in the rather distressing period in which we are right now, if anybody looks at it. If they don't, then we will not be worse off than what we are at present.
Yeah. So, of course, I have many questions, but I think we are running out of time. And so, Akhilesh, you have any questions? Anurag, Javed, Akhilesh?
Sir, thank you. We have actually quite a few questions which have come up on our various portals, Zoom as well as YouTube. One of the things that we will do is compile some of these questions, also bring them over to Dr. Alagh and your attention, and maybe we can just try and see if we can answer them or respond to some of them in part of our write-up that Dr. Alagh also just mentioned. Since you asked maybe one thing, and since I currently represent a bank, maybe if I can bring that topic up with Dr. Alagh.
Sure.
Dr. Saab, one of the things that as public policy we have done is to have this idea of a priority sector loan for agriculture sector for the banking system, which means that there is a significant amount of capital that continues to flow every year into the agriculture sector, irrespective in some sense of whether it is required or not, and especially to very small and maybe subscale farmers, etc. Any thoughts on how we should be thinking about this going forward, given that PSL guidelines were set almost 5 decades ago, and the agriculture and the economic scenario has changed dramatically since then?
Well, for one thing, what I would recommend for people of your level of distinction in the global thing is that if possible, if you can develop guidelines. See, agriculture is a very local game. You know, I mean, take the Basel guidelines. The fact that our agricultural year is July to the end of June is, I mean, we don't have the time now, but I've written a piece on how that is inconsistent with the Basel guidelines. So the question really is, I think the global systems and people like you can play a very important role there, need to develop those rules which cannot be broken, those where one can be flexible. And that's really the name of the game, which is that if a farmer is really in distress, we should be able to meet that distress in some kind of a fundamental way. I remember having a very big argument with Mr. Sharad Pawar once when I said that I think the farmers, it was a terrible drought for 2 years. I said, I think the farmers can repay over 6 years. And he said, no, 10 years. So, those kinds of details, I think we need to look at. But the plain fact of the matter is that if we don't do it properly and we don't set those rules, and that is a Basel problem really, then, I mean, it's the crooks who really get away. While we have, in a way, not done our homework because we talk about rules which come from models which we studied in our graduate school. My teacher told us that the Cowell Commission only said that theory and statistics are meant to be completely adjusted on the field, because that's how you develop new theories. And that, I think, is for a financier and somebody of your distinction and experience is, I mean, I shouldn't be giving advice, but it's a kind of thing, where I would like to share that thought with you, that how can one save what is important and be flexible in its application. Otherwise, countries like India and other big countries will not let you bully them, and you'll bully the small ones. And that's not quite the proper way of a global system to function.
Well, a more direct point would be, I'm always puzzled by this whole assumption that credit is the key to farming success, without really looking at particularly the demand side. And that I think is very important. Even keeping aside the efficiency argument for the moment. So that's one. The other is, even if you want to give credit, you could have a directed credit target, but make it completely tradable. And I say completely tradable. Let the banks who are good, and here Alagh's point that agriculture is a local game is very important. So if I'm specialized in lending to, let's say, coconut farmers, that doesn't automatically qualify me to lend to farmers who grow rice and so on. So let the banks decide, let them trade, let a Canara Bank do it all, but let a Standard Chartered Bank just get away without doing anything, but it pays the price to Canara Bank, in the scripts on agricultural lending and so on. And I would say this particularly for MSMEs as well as agriculture. So there is that kind of an option. And then, of course, my question to you is, how the hell can banks develop any competence when the government stands behind them and tells them whom to lend, what to lend, when to forgive, when not to forgive? Okay. I think that's a very major disease. So you need to probably have, these directed credit targets, but beyond that, nothing. Make it completely tradable. Don't have these rounds of debt forgiveness. You could always have rounds of, money being given from the government kitty to the farmers, which they then use to pay off debt and so on, which is a very different thing. Okay. See, the same money which government gives as debt forgiveness, they could have given directly and through some other ways, and then figured out how they are supposed to settle the debt. That will develop the right culture. And here you're destroying the very basis of banking. This is absurd, to say the least. Completely.
Our finance minister made a very great promise, and I was sitting with my bank manager, because once a year I have to go and give him a life certificate to get my pension. And so I asked him, I said, "Ye, aap kya karoge?" So he said, "Sir, finance ministers always say this." So I said, "But your chairman was there." He said, "Sir, my chairman will never say no. But if I give a bad loan without collateral, then my chairman will not come to help me when the supervisor and our financial auditors come." So I have to be very clear. A lot of what we call special lending to agriculture is actually rolling over of old loans, including to the MSMEs. And that's really not giving any additional funds to agriculture. And in a way, that is the kind of problem with the Basel system. The worst part of all this is that it destroys the system which gives financing. And that is the issue.
There is a very interesting point which has come, that we don't need more agriculture. We need less people in agriculture. Then we will have higher incomes for agriculturists and better use. My simple back question is, where do you take these people and put them? Okay. See, remember, even China, which is so advanced, with a mere 10% of its GDP coming from agriculture, still houses close to 38% of its population in agriculture. Okay. England, precisely because it succeeded in industrialization, okay, had a huge agricultural problem. So the problem of agriculture, in the sense that a lot more people are there, is going to be with us. So there are only two ways to solve it. Absorb them as much as possible in industry, but then your industry must grow very rapidly. You can't absorb them with a 5% growth. You bloody well grow at 10 or 12%, 8, 9%. If you have that, then you can have a reasonable 50-year-long period over which the surplus from agriculture can be absorbed. The other is improve agricultural productivity as much as possible. But there is a third thing, and that I think we are missing, which is to actually allow a terms of trade effect in favor of agriculture, so that agricultural food and agricultural prices rise faster than overall other inflation. But you have a government of India which is so utterly middle class in its orientation that it will not allow that. Okay, so the last 2 years, We have had farmers' incomes actually falling because the terms of trade have shifted dramatically against them. Something which was not happening in the previous, so many years. Okay, so China went through this. China went through a phase of, allowing agricultural prices to rise at humongous rates of 20, 24% per annum, 18% per annum, which allowed the farmers to come in and become prosperous, reasonably prosperous, and participate in the home market. We don't have that courage. This happened in the 80s. Okay, we don't have that courage to do that. And I think the need of the hour is to understand that the terms of trade has to shift in favor of agriculture. But if you have an RBI, which is so wedded to CPI, and CPI is 45% weight in food. So the moment onion prices rises, food prices rise, overall inflation goes up and it wants to hit the growth of the economy, which would have actually absorbed the people from agriculture. So you're kind of hardwiring yourself to lower growth, in the name of inflation. So one must get into the nature of inflation to worry about. If inflation is all caused by supply side, then the answer is supply side in agriculture, not killing the demand for scooters and cars and so on and so forth. It's rather obvious, but I think we are missing the point in the way the policymakers see it. Yeah, so that was one interesting question I thought.
I think, thank you, Professor Morris and Dr. Alagh. I'll ask Javed to close the session now.
Thank you, Anurag. First of all, thank you, Professor Morris, for hosting this wonderful discussion with Dr. Alagh. I would like to thank both of you on behalf of the entire Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group and the IIM fraternity for gracing the webinar and sharing us your understandings and opinions on this particular important subject of transforming agriculture during COVID-19. So thank you so much, sir, on behalf of the group, and we are very delighted, or we were very delighted to have you on this session, on the webinar. It would be very tough for me, sir, to summarize this seminar, but I would like to highlight a few things. First of all, Dr. Alagh very clearly set the context by emphasizing on the need and importance of agriculture and why it is important during these times to strengthen the irrigation system, the supply chain systems, and the agri-input markets during COVID. So that was one very important aspect which today's discussion touched upon. And Professor Morris also added that land records and title clearances, these are two important things which can be looked upon by the government during these times, which will again help to strengthen the sector. And on the measures and announcements by the government of India, Dr. Alagh said that there is a need to strengthen the projects like ENAM so that we can have more success stories from across the country. He gave examples of the chili farmers of Guntur. On APMCs, he said that APMCs, although they don't cover the entire markets, but there is a need to think afresh, and we need to build markets wherever the farmer goes. So that's a very important idea or a thought which Dr. Alagh has suggested, and we should look into this. On MSPs, he also stated that the farmers do not want MSPs, but there is a need, so looking at the situation, there is a need to have alternative mechanisms to offer better pricing or prices to farmers. During the subject, during the discussion, Professor Morris, we also touched upon issues like water efficiency use, subsidies, how to strengthen other organizations which are linked to agriculture. And so I would like to thank both of you and the entire audience. I would also like to tell you that, or say this, that we will be distilling this, and we will be putting up a note on this a summary note on this entire webinar. And I would like to thank the audience for participating so actively. We had close to 150 participants, and there were many thought-provoking questions. And I would like to thank the Institute faculty who contributed to the session, specifically Professor Rakesh Basan, Professor Anish, Sugathan, and the Alumni Office, Anurag Choudhury and Vidhi Desai. Special thanks are also due to the Alumni Special Interest Group coordinators, Akhilesh Tilotia and Suhail Qasim. And we also look forward to the next event, which will be announced by next week. So thank you everyone and enjoy your weekend.
It's a pleasure to have been here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alagh.
Thanks to Dr. Alagh.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. Thank you, Professor Morris.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.